Today, the Below Average Joe's MMA show present the weekend preview. And we have a trifecta of cards to go over for you today, not only for our beloved UFC, but also for Bellator and ONE FC along with it. We'll go over everything on these three cards, what to be on the lookout for. And also, we have some fight announcements. And Dominic, picograms are back in the headlines. All this and more, and it all starts right now. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's episode 269. I am one half of your hosting duo. My name is Noah Baker, coming to you from the great state of Indiana. The man to my right, that's Dominic Slee. He's coming to you from the great state of Ohio. Dominic, maybe I should have said temporarily coming to you from the great state of Indiana. Because, folks, I just got word. Work said, we're cutting your rotation early. We're sending you back to Ohio, baby. Me and Dominic will be back in the same state, yet we will be further apart. So,
that is actually true.
so I guess, I don't know. It feels a little more like a reunion in some ways, though.
Yeah, it does. It does.
We will be further apart somehow. So, but yeah, excited, anxious, a lot to get in order. April, I will be back in Ohio, so there will be a new background when that time comes, and I'm kind of thankful for it. I really don't. There's a lot of things I just don't like about this room layout. It's been really hard. I mean, it is a tug of war, Dom, to keep the
Tractor.
I guess closet.
Oh,
well, no, I'm trying to point at the closet over here.
Okay.
Trying to keep the closet out of frame and the window out of frame. So it has been a struggle, and I also like having the tractor sign in view.
Right.
And I mean, we got a bed frame in the background. I mean, it's a whole mess in here. So, and while Dominic's just got everything, the P's and Q's. I mean, he's got a skateboard that he have no wheels on it. I mean, what's going on there?
True. So, very true.
Excited, nervous, but you know what? What keeps me leveled? What keeps me grounded, Dom? It's that I get a bunch of MMA and combat sports to watch on the weekend, and this weekend is no different. If anything, it's maximizing the opportunity to watch MMA this weekend. 3 cards we're going over today. Bellator, ONE, UFC. And if you're a boxing fan, you got multiple big cards in boxing, including our beloved Jake Paul taking on Tommy Fury.
Yep.
Over in Saudi Arabia, actually.
Okay.
So, Dominic, I did a lot of setting up here, but how are you doing? I do like to know. It has been great weather. I'm sure that bodes well for the Battling for Bogey boys. So how's everything going?
Things are going really well. Yeah, we are slowly but surely getting more and more of those spring-type days here, which has been good for the Battling for Bogey fellas. We've gotten to record a few times, had a couple 18-hole outings. It's always a blast. There's really nothing better. It's like I have the 2 perfect things in terms of like my hobbies in life. And it's doing the MMA show, which means I get to watch all the MMA and talk about it with you. And then there's golfing, and that's golfing with the bros. And both of them, conveniently, I get to share with everybody else. So it's quite a beautiful thing. Life's good. We had a great, fantastic, over an hour-long conversation, off recording as well. It just felt good. We just needed it. We needed each other's energy and vibes. It had been a little while since a long talk, and it was wonderful. And now we get to talk even more, and it's all about MMA. No, we've not had a trifecta in quite some time. So this is going to be fun. Big fights, big implications. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Man, I love to hear it. If you guys want to know more about what me and Dominic talked about before we started recording, just imagine like 2 guys just verbally abusing each other for an hour.
Right.
I mean, just basically spitting on each other. Like we were just spitting.
Precisely.
Because we were so mad.
Right.
But that is the key to a healthy relationship, people.
Yes.
You know, I work with a guy who sleeps in separate bedrooms from his wife. And they say that's the key to being married for as long as he's been. And I said, you know what? The proof is in the pudding. So
there you go.
Anyways, let's move on to Bellator 291. coming to you straight from Ireland.
Yeah.
Main event for the welterweight title. Yaroslav Amosov is back.
Mm.
He is back. He will be taking on the interim champion, Logan Storley. Now, Dominic, obviously, we are talking about MMA here. We're talking about a sport. And I know it's a cliche to say it, but there are some things that are bigger than sports in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And Yaroslav Amosov's absence from the cage is due to one of those things that is bigger than sports. He
Yep.
is, of course, from Ukraine, born and raised. Ukraine, of course, having a lot of issues with Russia.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you watched any news, I'm sure you've heard about it. So he, much to his credit as a man, decided to step up and go fight for his country.
Mm-hmm.
So he's been over there fighting for the Ukraine, Dom.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just crazy. It's the amount of balls on a guy like that.
Yeah.
It's something that I would just never be able to comprehend.
Yeah.
But even though that is obviously a bigger than MMA thing, and there is no slight on him for being away for the time he's been away for, it is a point of interest in this fight that Amosov has not fought for the last couple years, and
Mm-hmm.
now he is coming back here to fight a man that he has actually already beaten before in Logan Storley, but in a very razor thin close decision, and one where I think if you look at how far each guy's come since then, I felt like Amosov was already that dude back then. He's still that dude today. Logan Storley had a very specific and narrow but elite skill set, obviously the wrestling. I think since then he has improved on his well-rounded game. There's some fights where you don't really see it. His last fight where he won the interim championship against Michael Page,
Mm-hmm.
literally very controversial in nature because of this is where the debate about scoring was huge, and we're talking about damage. And Logan Storley did not inflict a ton of damage in that fight, but he did sort of take down Michael Page at will and held him down, dominated the position battle, if you want to say. So I do think, though, that doesn't really tell the story of his improvement as a fighter.
Mm.
You look at the fight he had with Neiman Gracie, where he, even though Neiman Gracie is not a great striker either, Storley used his striking to win him that fight and looked pretty good doing it.
Right.
So with these factors in mind, Dominic, how different is this fight the second time around? Or not necessarily you saying that the result will be the same, but is the fight really the same fight when it's all said and done? Are these two going to look to do the same thing, and it's just a matter of whichever guy is able to get the better of the other for the majority of those 5 rounds?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's just hard to answer because it's been since June of 2021 that we've seen the champion, the undefeated Amosov fight. And I'll tell you, the one thing that I'm actually really intrigued with, and that's because we've got 2 grinders here, 2 guys that will go the distance, went 3 rounds with each other to a very close split decision. Now we have 5 rounds. So what is that extra 10 minutes going to do? Is it going to allow them to kind of finish things? I can't remember specifically in terms of it being a split decision, how razor close it would have been. I'd have to go back and watch it, of course. But I think that is going to play a big factor here. And we're talking about someone in Storley who, since that loss, has went 3-0. He has fought 3 times during Amosov's absence and looked really well. Like you said, he's had improvements in also areas where it's kind of just been kind of a stalemate, like the Michael Page fight. But overall, man, it just feels like Storley is coming into his all, a 14-1 record that only lost to the champ. Yaroslav, 26-0 at 29 years old. I'd like to think that we will see something different from that first fight. But then again, I just feel like we have 2 guys that are so good at what they do. It may be another kind of drag it out war. Now we get 10 extra minutes. That's kind of what I'm at least thinking right now.
Tell me if I'm wrong. Logan Storley only has 1 loss in his pro career, right? And that
and it was
to Amosov. These 2 have a combined 1 loss. I mean, this is about as elite of a fight as you can get in Bellator. And we've probably said that before with AJ McKee and Patricio Pitbull. But in terms of smaller scale and maybe not necessarily feeling like a super huge legacy defining fight. I think this is about as elite can get in terms of Bellator. And
Mm,
that is a lot of credit to Logan Storley and the improvements he's made. But make no mistake, Dom, the A side of this fight, the favorite going into this fight, the deserved favorite, is, in my opinion, the best fighter in the company that is
mm,
Bellator, and that's Yaroslav Amosov.
mm.
We have said time and time again, undefeated for a reason. That's something we've always said. And then we've also seen the reverse side of that, where what last week's card, forget
Right.
Hussein Ashkabov, where he was
Mm-hmm.
23-0 and you know competed somewhat okay with Jamal Emmers, but lost the fight. And
Mm-hmm.
he was kind of a guy who had beat up a lot of guys that had no records and below 500 records, whatnot. I think it's very rare to see in MMA a guy who is 26 fights in and is undefeated.
Mm.
And it asks you, and you have to question it a little bit. But when you look at his resume, Amosov is as legit as you can get in terms of an undefeated MMA fighter. You
Mm-hmm.
know, is he necessarily at the level of a Habib or I know Jon Jones technically has a loss, but I'm going to say Jon Jones. No. But right below that, in terms of his credibility as an undefeated fighter, yeah, I put a lot of stock on his ability,
Yeah.
and especially when it's standing. I I think he might be the best striker in this entire company.
Yeah.
Now, welterweight's an interesting division because the UFC have really great welterweights. Kamaru Usman was the number one pound per pound fighter for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
He gets knocked out by Leon Edwards, who's now sort of taken the throne, and we'll see if he's able to hold it. But Dominic, even though I can't say with confidence Amosov would compete for a welterweight title or win a welterweight title in the UFC, I do think that I, how do I say it? I believe he would be in the mix in the
Oh yeah.
UFC, and I that may for other guys, other champions. At one time we talked about AJ McKee, like a guy who could compete
Mm-hmm.
perhaps for a championship in the UFC. That is a big credit to Amosov, even though I can't quite go all the way and make the headline of, oh, he is a champion level fighter no matter what company he's in.
Right.
It's sort of we have to see him build on the resume a little bit, but
Of course.
um, this is as high level MMA can get in Bellator, and I do implore everybody to make sure you watch this card because you don't get fights like these often, and Bellator sure as shit ain't gonna tell you about it. So that's what
Yeah.
our job is, Dom. That's what our
Yeah.
job is to do here.
I got on the script for today to get everything ready in the studio, and I did find myself forgetting that Bellator is happening for a moment. For a guy that is all about MMA for years and years, that's a problem. But this is a great fight. They deserve to have their eyes on them. It's cool too. Like, how crazy that crowd gets in Ireland. There's
Mhm.
nothing better. There's not many things better in MMA than a Bellator card in Ireland. Those fans there are absolutely insane. It really does make you wonder what it would be like if the UFC were to return there. But I like that Bellator's they've kind of taken that region in Europe specifically. They're going to Paris again later this year. They go to Italy. They go to Ireland multiple times a year. Good on them. We need more promotion, but this is an incredible fight. Again, 40-1 combined record for these guys. And Amosov, more to the point of undefeated for a reason, 7-0 in Bellator. That gives me really good confidence in saying it for him specifically compared to some people we've talked about lately. So this should be fun. And it really, truthfully, like the winner of this is definitely, I think, in the discussion as like a top 5 welterweight in all of MMA right now. I think so.
Okay, I like that adding that stakes to it, Dom. I didn't quite go there. I wanted to, but I'm glad you did because I do think that this fight matters in that way.
Mm,
Welterweight's a very talented division, so it's hard to. I mean, it's the difference between 2 and 10 is not far.
mm,
So to say that the winner of this fight would be a top 10 welterweight in the world, that just doesn't have quite the pizzazz to it, even though
right.
it does mean something.
Of course.
So if there's one thing or two things actually that I can give Bellator credit for that they I think do better than the UFC, quite frankly, that might be a stretch, but I do think they're one of them. They definitely do better. But what you said about them embracing sort of being the MMA company of Europe and really
Mm,
hitting that European market hard. They're constantly going to Dublin. They make it a yearly
yep.
tradition. They go to London, they go to Paris. Paris is a yearly
Yep.
thing for them. It's always something to expect. And even things like Hawaii, like
Yep.
this is the second year in a row they're doing back-to-back shows in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Hit the areas that the UFC neglect. You
Yeah.
know what? Dare I recommend be the company of the fucking Midwest because we've
Please.
been neglected more than any of these people have been.
Yeah. Yeah.
But a sidetrack
Yeah.
there.
Of course.
I think that even if they may not do it better than the UFC, because when the UFC nail it, the London cards last year,
Oh yeah. It's
they really, and obviously Australia, they were just that. But Bellator, I think, does a really good job of, from what I hear, guys like Pete Carroll have talked about this. When Bellator is at some areas of Europe more recognizable to the casual MMA fan than the UFC. So I think that's a real credit to what they're trying to build in sort of making the European market a focus.
mm,
The thing I think they really do better, Dom, is taking these guys who again are prospects, but like guys with no professional experience at all and building them through their ranks, just giving them fights, giving them
oh,
experience.
they
Guys
do.
like that is something that Bellator has done really well. And there's talent throughout this card that represent that. You got the younger brother of Zabit, Kasan Magomed Sharipov on this very card,
Mm,
and he is like a minus 1100.
yeah.
And that's something that Bellator also does. But it's okay because he is young.
Right.
He's what, 21, 22 years old?
Yeah.
He's still growing, developing. They're just giving him experience right now. And eventually he's going to end up probably in Bellator fighting some of the top guys before we know it here in a couple of years. It happened before our eyes with Usman Nurmagomedov. He's now the champion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, literally, that's what AJ McKee was too. Every professional fight that AJ McKee's ever had has been in Bellator.
It's crazy.
They do that very well. You're right. They do that a lot differently than the PFL, obviously, and of course the UFC. They'll find these young talents like on the amateur level. They've even been having amateur fights on their cards over the past like 6 or 7 months. And that's probably the reason. I don't know if anybody's seen this card. There are 18 fights on this Bellator card Saturday. So it's going to be a long day of fights for them, but it's awesome because there are so many young prospects that, didn't do anything huge in LFA or build a name, but they're in Bellator and fight number 1 or number 2, and it's still incredible opportunity for them. So
yeah, first fight of the night's Kasan Magomed Sharipov. So
yeah,
you got to tune in early if you want to watch a guy that could be a future champion.
exactly.
We have more on Bellator 291 to come, but let's move into a little one action, Dom. This will be happening Friday night, 8 p.m. on Amazon Prime.
Mm.
It'll be a rematch in the main event.
Oh.
Some have said there have been some whispers, Dom, that we have been neglecting our coverage of one a little bit over the last few months.
Mm.
And you know what? Hand up. Hand up. We are men that recognize when we have fallen short, and we'll admit we've fallen short.
Mm.
Football season really grabs you by the balls.
Yeah, it does. It does.
So, I think that we should be given credit for admitting that, and we're here to make up for it now.
Of course.
So the main event, they're running it back for the bantamweight title, which is now vacated, similar to a Charles Oliveira situation at UFC 274, but also different. And I'll explain why.
With a little more drama.
A little more just messiness and drama.
Yeah.
Back in October, I believe you said, Jon Lineker and Fabricio Andrade were supposed to fight in the main event of one of the other one on Prime cards. Jon Lineker, the champion, of course, knocked out a one legend in Bibiano Fernandez. I believe that was on that 1X card. Could be wrong. It was around that time frame because we were really hitting our one coverage at that time.
Right.
And he had one of the knockouts of the year, especially for one, with his knockout of the veteran Bibiano Fernandez. So John Lineker, UFC veteran, always been an exciting fighter. But
Yep.
what's always been his Achilles heel, Dom?
The weight.
The weight. It's
Mm.
always been an issue for him.
Yeah.
So they go to weigh in. Of course, one has their hydration test. John Lineker missed weight.
Yeah.
So then Andrade is the only one eligible to win the championship. Okay. All that has to happen here now is Andrade win the fight, and then we can ride off into the sunset into tomorrow.
Right.
It's no
Right.
harm, no foul. Well, he starts off great, starts off hot. We get into round 3, and then, oh boy, an inadvertent nut shot ends everything. No contest.
Yeah.
And now the belt is up for grabs. Lineker stripped due to his weight miss. So we're running it back here. So I don't think this fight can be any worse than what we got last time due to the way things ended. It was a fine fight before that. But due to all the controversy, the weight miss, the way the fight ended, I don't see it being any worse this time around.
Yeah.
And I do think there's something to be said, though, that we're recording this before I believe John Lineker is weighed in this time.
And this is true.
And I mean, I believe he has the record. If you go for the UFC or tied, him and Oliveira, I believe, have the most weight misses in UFC history. Which I hate to say that about my boy Oliveira like that.
Yeah.
For Lineker, this could, potentially be an issue for him. It's so interesting. This is a guy who fought at 125 pounds at points in the UFC. He's now fighting at 145 pounds. It is their bantamweight division due to the the hydration rules and stuff. Like Mighty Mouse fights at 135,
Right.
So in a way, it's like he would be fighting at 135 pounds in the UFC if you want to do the math like that. But that could be a real factor in this fight. What kind of John Lineker are we going to get here? Is he going to make the weight, but is he going to be super just drained from the weight cut? And this is a guy in Fabricio Andrade, Dom, who is super talented, 25 years old, 8-2. He looks like the real deal. He was winning that fight against John Lineker. So what do you kind of see happening here? Because obviously I would hope we're not going to get what we got last time. But I mean, what can John Lineker really do here to even things out, considering he was on his way to losing his title before, in a way, sort of him throwing an inadvertent nut shot sort of was to his benefit in some way. So how do you expect things to shake up this time?
Oh, well, first and foremost, make the weight, please, John. It's weird because before that fight, he had went 4-0 in one. No weight issues, at least that I can recall in those first 4 fights. Had finished 3 straight via knockout going into that fight with Fabricio. So it really felt like, and I even remember having that really funny clip from a while back where the moment of silence thing that I did, it was really awkward and embarrassing, but it's a pretty funny moment historically for the show. He was on a tear, and we were talking about how awesome it was for him to be having this resurgence and becoming a champion and all this fun stuff. And it's crazy how this one, really 2 moments, I guess, but combined, a weight miss and a groin shot, kind of erased all of that positive momentum that he had. So I'd like to see him right the ship, right the wrongs, get back to his winning ways in one. But you're right. Fabricio is legit, man, and he's been on a finishing streak himself. You said that he was winning this fight before the illegal groin strike happened. What can John do? He's always going to have that power. Hands of stone for a reason is what they call him. But is he going to be able to land that on a guy that's much quicker, much younger at this point in his career, a guy that's probably not going to struggle as bad with the weight in Fabricio Andrade? I don't know, man. I'm kind of getting a feeling that the young gun may be able to do what he was already doing in that first fight, and he maybe even put a stamp on it this time. That's the vibes I'm getting.
You know what's weird, though? I agree. I agree with pretty much everything you said. I do have to make note, though, that Dominic did remind me of just the one of the funniest moments ever.
It's a good one, yeah.
I believe I said, let's take a moment to recognize, like, just how the resurgence of John Lineker.
Yeah.
And Dom, I kid you not, guys, took a moment of silence. What is usually reserved for dead people or people that are struggling with God knows what sort of
Yeah.
ailments in their life, Dom decided to use for a man who was really at his peak in terms of this
Yeah.
resurgence.
Yeah.
I mean, really, we should take a moment of silence now for maybe we'll wait till Monday. If John Lineker loses, maybe we need to do a moment of silence. I don't know.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I guess Dom, now you kind of took me off my
Oh,
train of
it's in
thought.
your head. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I agree with everything you said as far as I do lean on Andrade here. There is an element of we've already seen it, and outside of some real just big kind of what's the word outside of Lineker making some huge adjustments,
Yeah.
I don't really see it going any different. But Dom, let's kind of look at history here for a second. If I can recall, there have been a couple high profile examples of fights that have gone this way where a guy misses weight, um, the fight goes on as planned, or not necessarily misses weight. Let's look at the fact that this was a no contest.
Okay.
You have a fight going a certain direction. There's a certain guy who is clearly winning that fight,
Yeah.
and then something happens, and the fight is either a no contest or a DQ or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then they run it back immediately. Well, every time you kind of go in expecting the guy who showed you he was the better fighter in the first one to win the second time.
Right.
But history lately has told us that may not be the case. I am thinking, of course, of the main event we saw for Bellator in Chicago, Vadim Demkov versus Corey Anderson.
Yeah.
First time I thought Corey Anderson felt like he was close to getting a finish, was on his way to winning it all. The
Yep.
Grand Prix, the championship, all that he had worked so hard for. This was a former tough winner, a guy who had never quite hit through that glass ceiling. And then the second fight, he loses. He loses somewhat convincingly. I mean, it was somewhat close, but
we talked about Lineker making adjustments. Nemkov made all of the adjustments. So
the other example I think of, Dom, UFC, Petr Yan, Aljamain Sterling, where Petr Yan sort of dominating Aljamain on the feet, landing those trips. I mean, even not allowing any takedowns. Of course, the illegal knee, which was on Jan's, it was his fault, gets him DQ'd. They run it back, Dom. Aljamain lands takedowns pretty convincingly. Kind of wins 3 rounds without, like, I was sitting there going, wow, I don't think Petr Yan's going to win this fight. Like, it was kind of crazy because how talented I thought he was.
Right.
So, obviously, every situation is different. But because of that, it does make me wonder if we are so focused on Andrade perhaps being this is his moment due to, what we just saw when Lineker's body of work speaks more than what we've seen from Andrade. I mean, Lineker has quadruple the professional MMA fights that Andrade has. That can also be a dual-edged sword, though. It can work in your favor in terms of fight IQ, in terms of just, fight IQ, what you've seen, your ability to hone in on your skills and improve. But also, Dominic, it can be a dual-edged sword because that's a lot of damage you can accumulate. And obviously the fight years matter more than the actual age.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting fight again. I'm not going to bet on it because I think it could be a trap. I think Andrade could be. I am almost fading myself in my own mind that
I see.
I am so convinced that Andrade is clearly going to win because I'm not convinced that Lineker is going to have a smooth weight cut. I'm not convinced that he's going to be able to make the adjustments. And that's exactly what he may do. And like you said, he's always got the equalizer, a guy who has that one-punch knockout capability. Look at what he did to Bibiano Fernandez. I mean, he had that man out.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't even need to be up in the fight to finish it.
Yes, exactly. He's always dangerous.
So make sure to tune into that Amazon Prime Friday.
That's Friday night.
Okay. Yep. Friday, 8 p.m. We will move on to the UFC. UFC third today. So how about that? I mean, you got to talk. You got to give the titles their place here on
exactly.
So UFC Vegas insert number here. Your headliner in the light heavyweight division. I mean, is this like the 37th main event in the since the COVID era of the UFC. Is this like the 37th main event to feature light heavyweights or heavyweights?
It's got to be up there. I like that number, honestly.
I mean,
We might have to fact check that and come back Monday.
We have not got a men's flyweight main event since Davison and Benavidez.
That makes me want to throw up.
Now, that's not including pay-per-views. Davison, of course, and Moreno.
But still.
Main evented 256. The month before, you had Davison and Alex Perez. But since 2020, not a single flyweight main event.
On a fight night main event. And look at the momentum that the division's built during the last 2 years. It's the best it's ever been.
I mean, the best rivalry the division ever had, Davison and Brandon Moreno, have fought now 4 times. The rest of their series of bouts were co-mains.
Wow. We're gonna have to change that.
That's a side note because we do have a pretty good main event here. Nikita Krylov is your minus 170 favorite, taking on the number 8 ranked Ryan Spann at plus 140. You sort of have to, with both these guys, you feel like you know so much about them already, and yet you feel like you almost have to throw out everything you already know.
Yeah.
Because Nikita Krylov, throughout his career, much against what I have infamously said on one of our first episodes covering him, a finisher, an exciting fighter, a man who does not let things go to the judges' scorecards.
Yeah.
And he is obviously made the most of many of his opportunities because of that. And when he goes up against a guy like you look at Ryan Spann, who has sort of that same kill or be killed kind of mentality, 5 straight fights of his ending in the first round, which I'm sure Dominic kind of stole that point from him.
You're good.
Krylov, it tends to do well when he goes up against those types of fighters. It's the fighters that are, a little bit smarter in their approach, some would say. Those are the ones where right when he's about to, we've talked about this with guys like Neil Magny or Michael Chiesa, where right when they're on the cusp of greatness, they fail. And I think Krylov's been around long enough to where it's happened to him multiple times. Mm-hmm. In the other corner, Ryan Spann. I had been ready to sort of write off Ryan Spann. Around the time he main evented with Anthony Smith, didn't look great there.
Yeah.
Even before that, the fight with Johnny Walker on that Colby Covington, Tyron Woodley fight night. Mm. He looked like he might finish it early, but then the way he got put out so quick, I said, this guy's a big dude. He's got big power. He's got good skills, but he can't really take the punishment. He just seems to get finished too quick for a guy who kind of comes in like a bull in a china shop. That's a risky endeavor if you can't quite take a punch. So,
yeah.
But then after his last win, Dom, he made a point, and his last win was Dominic Reyes, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
He said, honestly, I hadn't been taking this career all that serious. I hadn't really been training that hard.
Yeah.
But now he was committed.
Yeah.
So you kind of feel like these two guys come in here almost with a clean slate, despite we knowing so much about them already. And Dominic, you had made a point. I don't want to, there no decisions have been made for the below average bet slip, but Dominic had made a point to let me know he's leaning pretty heavily on that Ryan Spann plus 140. I want you to kind of tell the people why that is.
Yeah. So I'm not necessarily surprised that he's an underdog, but at the same time, I feel like this fight shouldn't be anything more or less than a pick'em. I am shocked that Nikita Krylov is a minus 170 favorite here, varying across multiple books, give or take a couple. And I understand like the experience and all of the fights that he's had in the UFC. He's been in the UFC for quite some time now. He's fought a lot of top guys, very good competition, good wins, good losses. Not that there are good losses, but you get the point. Ryan Spann, though, has a great UFC record, but just nowhere near the competition. He's 7-2 in the company. But when you really just look, especially in his early days, I don't know, man. I mean, I'm kind of looking again. Devin Clark, Sam Alvey, Johnny Walker, Serkinov, Smith, Kudalaba, Reyes. It's not terrible level of competition. But again, just, I don't know. It's very interesting. But that post-fight speech from him told me enough. That makes me want to bet on Ryan Spann as an underdog here in this fight. And when you add in the fact that Krylov, and obviously don't get me wrong, Spann gets finished too, but Krylov's been finished 7 out of his 9 losses. And with a guy as freakishly athletic and strong as Ryan Spann at 6'5", built like he's sculpted like a statue, I think he's a dangerous man right now. 31 years old, just now in his prime, taking the sport serious for the first time ever. And you already, prior to taking the sport serious, had a 6-2 record in the UFC. That's telling me a lot here. And that's really the main reason. I'm not looking at the experience of Krylov to overshadow the ability and I think potential that I believe Spann has. That last fight, and I know it's Dominic Reyes, and he's lost so many fights in a row by knockout. I get it. But it did something to me with Spann. I'm like a believer in this potential again. And maybe it's that mixed with the way that light heavyweight is right now. We've got a lot of freshness up at the top. The championship's been trading ways for quite some time now, the past couple of years. Spann's putting it together. I think he gets a big win. And I have to bring this quick fact in just because it's fun. Noah pointed out the 5 straight first rounds for Spann. These guys have 66 combined professional fights. 57 of them have not gone the distance. So for those of you that are not wanting to lean a particular side, let's just say you're probably pretty safe to bet not to go the distance and fight lines in this one too.
That's going to make a great clip if that fight goes to a decision.
Yeah, we've had a few of those in the past.
God, I'm still, I get PTSD from moments like that from my Prohaska.
Oh, that's a good
Teixeira.
one. Yeah.
So I've been a little more reluctant to get on the Ryan Spann hype train again. And all your points are very valid. I did feel a little something when he spoke after his fight. I did feel that. I was like, whoa, if this guy was not taking it serious, it was 6-2. What? Like, I did feel that.
Yeah.
And in this fight itself, I actually think the matchup is sort of to Spann's favor. And the reason why is not because Krylov is not a great fighter in his own right. He is. But when you have two guys who come in so aggressive, who come in looking to put away their opponents early and put themselves at risk of getting finished themselves to do so, I tend to lean for the guy who's got those athletic advantages.
Yeah.
And that is Ryan Spann in this matchup. He's bigger. He's probably faster, stronger, has more power. I do question his chin more.
Yeah.
But, I don't know the last time Krylov got hit by a guy with the power and size and strength of Ryan Spann.
Yeah.
So I tend to just lean with the guy with those natural advantages. Like, okay, throw skill out the window. Who's the guy that you're going to lean to if it's a street fight? Ryan Spann has that imposing figure that you just sort of go, okay, that dude, I don't want to fuck with him.
Yeah.
So maybe not the best way to do it, but in my mind, that's how it works. So I sort of do lean his way in this fight, but my hesitancy is because we're putting a lot of faith in what a guy said in a post-fight in the cage emotional interview. And now he said this before really, I mean, maybe he was saying the lead up to that fight was the first time he's really taken it serious. Okay. We haven't really seen what he's done since then. Has he continued down that way?
Yeah.
For all we know, he sort of went, this training every day shit, kind of hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sort of half joking when I say it because I tend to believe these guys are built different. But it does make me pause a little bit. Unlike what I've done recently with like Aaron Blanchfield, where I'm just like all in.
Yeah.
With Ryan Spann, I'm taking more of your approach, Dom, where it's like, I need to sort of believe, I need to see it. And if he were to get through Krylov, that would be a giant step for me in sort of coming to terms with the fact that he's a real player in this division.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for him, and this was the problem I had with believing in a guy like Jan Blachowicz in the light heavyweight division. I've seen so much of him already, seen so much of his down moments, his agonizing moments, that it makes it hard to believe he can be more than what he is currently. And he's a top 10 light heavyweight in the UFC. That is something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it makes it hard to believe he can really get to that top 5, get the title contention, win a title. Because that's
Mm.
really this win here, Dom, would put him at number 6. That's what we're looking at
Puts him
as he moves
close.
forward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a good main event, though. I actually don't dislike this one.
Yeah, I agree. I do like this.
It's one I've slept on a little bit. Like
Mm.
sometimes when you get those main event announcements and they're the ones everybody's sleeping on,
Yeah.
Blanchfield, Santos, and me and
Right.
you were just like
Yeah.
head over heels for it. This is one that I heard was announced, and I was like, okay. But then as it's gotten closer, I'm like, you know what? I
Mhm.
think this is, for one, going to be a violent fight.
Yes.
So that's never a problem.
Right.
And two, I think it does matter. It has stakes, and that's what we
Yes.
want.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. There's more coming from this card, but we do have a little bit more news to talk about. And let's start with the picogram discussion, Dom. This could be pretty short, or maybe we'll go for a while. But I'm going to pull up, or on my phone, I guess, I'm going to pull up a couple of tweets just to give context to this. So a man by the name of Bo Hightower on Twitter tweeted, Jon Jones should get reparations for his USADA suspensions given, in quotations, the science changed, unquote, and now tests under 100 picograms per milliliter are not positive anymore.
Mm-hmm.
None of his positive tests would be a positive under the current rules. His no contest against Daniel Cormier should be restored to a win. And then Jon Jones himself came out later and said, I feel officially cleared. There will be no asterisk next to any of my performances. It's good the rest of the world can see what I've known this whole time. My only advantage over my competition has been pure hard work.
See, I saw that tweet and actually was like, what happened? I never knew until I saw the script today. So I'm actually really glad you put this on here because I think this could go under the radar. I don't know if a lot of people know what happened here.
Yeah, I'll give credit. Morning Combat did talk about this, Luke Thomas and BC. So I had seen it on Twitter before that, but when I saw them talking about it and the direction they went in their discussion, I was like, this is a very interesting topic. And the part I want to focus on, Dom, is that whole overturning the no contest. Now, this is maybe it's a trivial part of this discussion. It's a bit like talking pound for pound almost. Like it's all hypotheticals and not something that'll ever actually happen. Like, let's accept the fact right now, before we get into this, that no contest against DC is never going to be overturned.
Okay.
Never. In my eyes, it's never going to be overturned.
Right.
I don't know if you agree.
I would be surprised if it did. Yes.
Yeah. So with that being said, though, Dom, the question I'm going to ask you is, should it be? Should it be overturned? Given that the science has changed, given that USADA has now declared that tests under 100 picograms are no longer positives in their eyes. It is no longer they have found now that is too deep into the weaves, and I'm guessing some sort of verbiage, it does not have a dramatic impact on your performance or your recovery or whatever. Given that that's the case, does that somehow vindicate Jon Jones for that fight with Daniel Cormier? Is he, in your eyes, now more of a winner of that fight? Has it restored the outcome of that fight in your eyes?
Okay, so this is where I'm viewing this. Should it be switched? Because I already said I don't think it will be switched, but I also don't think it should be switched because the key words here are now. That's the ruling. This was, when did that fight happen? 2017, 6 years ago. At that point, it was still a thing. It was still a rule, and that's why it got overturned. So if it would have happened in 2023, 2022, sure, let's overturn that thing. He popped for it, but it turns out it wasn't anything significant under the current state of rules. Let's flip it. But this was years and years ago. So no, I don't think it should even be considered for being reversed. However, I remember the discussions during that time and how even Nowitzki was coming out and saying, even though he tested positive and it got turned to a no contest, it really, what was it, like 1 grain of salt in an Olympic-sized pool? I think
that was the discussion more for his Alexander Gustafsson rematch.
Okay.
When they moved the card like overnight to California. Okay. You kind of remember that?
Yeah.
So like that fight, even like at the time, he was sort of cleared of any wrongdoing either. But the Jon Jones one is the one where he tested positive, and it was not. I don't remember what the picogram number was,
Right.
but it was under 100 apparently,
Yeah.
and as it was when he fought
Gus.
Gus the second time. So
Yeah, because they
that
said Gus
discussion
was like remnants of the
yeah,
DC
so
fight, I think.
that discussion wasn't had at the time, but it is the same thing, Dom, what you're
Right.
saying.
Okay.
The, you know, grain of salt into the Olympic
Right.
size swimming
Right.
pool. So continue.
So that's the thing. So on the first side of the coin is no, I don't think it should be. I don't think it needs to happen. But it doesn't change my view on his performance against DC in that second fight was never really hindered by the picogram thing. Because regardless if it was set a win or a no contest, he had an incredible finish. And let us not forget, DC was actually started that fight really well. Like I don't look back on that fight having any negative thoughts on either side of the coin. So it doesn't really change much for me present day today. But I think it's worth talking about and discussing. First off, to hear what you think, and if there's anyone else out there that thinks yes or no on this debate as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I think this is unfortunate, of course. I mean, not that Jon Jones is someone that's a sympathetic figure like at all in
mhm,
MMA. I mean, he's had his fair share of
yeah,
transgressions that we've even covered on the show, and I don't necessarily feel bad for him, but I'm just saying that it is unfortunate that this is a guy who, of course, is the best of all time in my eyes,
mhm,
and for him to have had that big moment at UFC 214 where he wins the title, and then he's stripped immediately afterwards. And again, I'm not saying he's worthy of sympathy, but let's be clear, a lot of the discussion after that was talking about what a cheat he was and how this ruined his legacy. And I'm not blaming anybody for having those takes at the time because you're only working with the knowledge you're given.
you're right. Yeah,
Now you look back on it and you go, oof, like this is a guy whose career went a completely different direction in some ways because of that. And then, of course,
mhm,
the Gus fight, the pulsating effect, and all
yeah,
that, and the card being moved overnight. A lot of people, I mean, that really soured Jon Jones.
yeah,
People forget now because Jon Jones is very controversial now. Before UFC 214, Dom, he was still somewhat beloved. Like he was the fan favorite against Daniel Cormier in that second fight.
yeah. That's crazy.
Like Daniel Cormier is being booed at all the press conferences, and Jon Jones is being cheered. Like people
People
wanted,
were that excited to see him again.
they
Yeah,
wanted that redemption for
yeah,
Jon Jones. This guy who had had all these struggles,
yeah,
and this could be, I one of my favorite
yeah.
like hype video for a card ever, where the fire and
Yes.
oh my god, I've
Yeah.
watched it 2 nights ago
Yeah.
because I put this on the script. I was like, you know what, I'm going to go
It,
watch
it's the
that.
best promo ever, I think, in
Best promo
UFC
they've
history.
ever done,
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you saw what happened afterwards. You're like, well, shit. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess it was all
Yeah.
kind of for naught. But to answer my own question here, I think it's a slippery slope because if you do it for him, if you restore this victory for him, I mean, what are we going back and doing it for every test that was ever given? And I
Well, it's
mean,
like the marijuana thing with Nate
yeah,
or Nick
that's
Diaz.
that's been the biggest
Yeah.
detracting point is people say, well, what about Nick Diaz?
Yeah.
I mean, truthfully, if you're someone who believes that Jon Jones should have that victory restored, then you should probably also believe everything else. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
it shouldn't be
Can't pick and
just Jon
choose.
Jones. Like it should
Yeah.
be anybody else who had a test under 100 and
And
anybody
vice
who
versa.
tested positive for marijuana. And,
Yeah.
so in that way, it's like, I mean, are we really going to go back into history books and,
Yeah.
go change everything? Much like what you said, Dom, the record never really mattered to me. Like it didn't
Yeah.
matter that win got changed to a no contest. I saw what I saw.
Yeah. Exactly.
Jon Jones won that fight with a beautiful head kick and
Whew.
follow up ground and pound,
Yeah.
and that was it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Daniel Cormier had to accept it like that because I understand how frustrating it could be if you are on the receiving end of a knockout and then the guy that knocked you out tests positive. But I've also come to grips with the belief, Dom, that I believe almost everybody in the sport is using some form of advantage to,
Yeah.
help them out. I just that's what I've come to. I've stopped souring on people because they test positive. Like, yeah, you got caught, you got to face the consequences of that. But I also don't really blame anybody for doing it
Yeah.
because I think everybody does it.
Yeah.
It might be a simpleton take, but that's sort of where I stand. So, should it be? I guess no, because like it's just a reality that we should be allowed as a society, as a sport, to adapt to knowledge that's we
Right.
should be able to grow with the knowledge at hand.
Right.
So
But it
just
doesn't change the
because,
past.
obviously the testing's come a long way, and I guess it got to a point where it was too good.
Yeah.
We're talking way back in the day when you had like guys that could, I mean, they were doing everything
Yeah.
and weren't getting caught most of the time. It's just like obviously we know that at that time a lot of those guys that were not testing positive were probably on stuff.
Yeah.
You got to grow with the times, and I mean, yes, it'd be great to go back and change every little thing that's been affected by it, but I just don't think people should worry too much about a no. Like, I don't think people should look at that fight as not being a win for Jon Jones. I don't think they ever should have.
Right.
Sure, technically, the record book said it's a no contest. It's not a win. But look at what your eyes told you. He won the fucking fight.
Right. Exactly.
He's 2-0 on DC in my eyes. I mean, that's all.
I agree.
That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, I guess I will say though that Jon, his tweet did kind of like I almost felt like he was leaning into it a little bit. Like,
Had to have been. Yeah.
That last sentence where he said, "My only advantage over my competition has been pure hard work."
And dude, Jon has always been that way. He's always been this elite level of confident in himself. And he's not always shit talked like everyone that he's fought, but he's always let everyone that he's ever fought know, I'm better than you.
He does have this way of like
he's so witty.
He's very hard to. It's very hard to read, especially with text. But it's hard to read how sincere he is. Like when he was tweeting about Daniel Cormier just like less than a week ago.
I'm so glad you brought this up because I was going to hold back, but now I want to talk about it. So
so when he tweeted that and he said, I will allow you to commentate my fight, and he had all these nice things to say, but then he's saying, I will allow you. I believe you are capable of calling an unbiased fight. Keep in mind, Daniel Cormier called Jon Jones' fight with Ovince St. Preux back in UFC 197.
Yeah.
And that was at the height of their rivalry. Yeah. So it was so funny when I was reading that because I was like, man, I want to believe that Jon's like being sincere and they can kind of squash this in some way. But you just like those little things in there, you feel like they're just little digs just from the go. Yeah. I'm still the man and you're still below me.
Dude, low key, I think Jon Jones is one of the best trash talkers of all time. It's just in a different type of way. But you brought up DC, so I have to ask this question. Because I very badly, Noah, you know how DC does the sit downs with fighters during fight weeks when he's doing a certain card, big pay-per-views? Over under 49.5% chance we see those two come together and do a sit down. I want it so bad. I just got chills thinking about the fact that it's at least possible. I want that so badly. You think about the history that these two fighters have had with one another. Remember the sit down they had with Joe Rogan in between them? I want a present day retired Daniel Cormier, a returning Jon Jones at heavyweight to sit down and have a discussion regarding fighting. So bad, dude.
I'm gonna say under.
Okay.
But I don't want to burst your bubble though because I want to see it too,
dude.
Here's what I'll say. You know what? I'll bring it back around. I'm gonna say under for this fight, but before Jon Jones's career is over, they will have that discussion.
I will accept that.
And that's that's going out on a limb because some people think if Jon Jones loses this fight to Gane, that's it. They think he's retiring. So,
that's a good point too. I've not even really thought about that scenario, but it's
yeah. But you are right. There is a world, Dom, where at the Joeys at the end of the year, that Jon Jones makes it as a nominee for the Hot Mic Award for tweets.
Yes,
it's possible.
Oh, it's possible. Very possible.
Now, let's move on to some fight announcements. That was I'm glad we put that on the script. That was fun discussion.
Me too.
So I'm just going to go through the fights per usual, and you can tell me what sticks out to you, good or bad.
Come on now.
April 22nd, it looks like this is going to be the main event of a fight night card. Sergei Pavlovich taking on Curtis Blaydes, a big test for both guys.
Yeah.
May 6th, UFC 288. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is the headliner. Could be wrong. It obviously could be a co-main, but it's going to be 5 rounds, obviously, for the bantamweight title. Aljamain Sterling taking on a returning Henry Cejudo, the King of Cringe, 2-division champion, is back. Also, UFC 288, Dom, Marina Rodriguez looks to get back on track against Virna Jandiroba. May 13th. Jailton Almeida looks to arrive on the heavyweight scene as he takes on Biggie Boy Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And also on May 13th, Dom, does Mackenzie Dern have what it takes as she goes up against a veteran, someone who's always down to throw down, Angela Hill?
Yeah. That's a hell of a list. That's a good list. I love all these fights. I think they're all very good. That's why we put them on here. But guys, I mean, Henry Cejudo's coming back. It looks like it anyways. I don't see how that's not the number one fight to talk about here because it's a huge deal. He retired. It's been a couple years, but he's never quite closed the door completely. He's always been from the sidelines talking, chirping about his return. And in his retirement, by the way, has become a hell of a coach, by the way. A lot of great fighters, including Jon Jones, went out to Arizona and have trained at that camp.
I forgot about that. And then Davidson's been training
Davison has been with Henry.
Zhang Wei
Li. And, you look at Henry and all of his accolades. I think it's incredible that he can do these things as a coach. I think it's awesome. And as a job, outside of being a fighter, to have that in a gym is awesome. But this fight is very, very intriguing. You look at these two guys, they're known for their grappling. What's going to happen when they get in there to the cage together, the storylines behind it, I think, are great. We're going to have a shit ton of cringy shit talk on fight week. You can best believe that, by the way. I think it's incredible, and it just adds to this upcoming schedule the UFC is cranking out. I'm telling you, I know that they always have a run each year with big fights back to back to back, but we're talking months on end with humongous fight announcements, title fights, big implications. The 30th anniversary for the UFC through February and what we're about to get into looks like it could be one of, if not the biggest years ever. And not to mention Connor's coming back. This is a big year.
That's a good point, Dom. I didn't think about that. Where's Ronda Rousey's fine ass at?
Ronda's go. Yeah.
No, I love that main event. Dom, it's been something that's been a miss on this podcast. Something that really defined my MMA fandom before this podcast. I was a huge Henry Cejudo guy. Huge.
Well, we know how high you are on him as an all-time athlete.
Yeah, I think I said at one point in time he was the best combat sports athlete of all time.
Yeah.
Dude, if you look at the accolades.
A gold medal, 2 UFC titles, defended both of them.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, I was like, did you just take the 3? You don't even have to talk about the defenses. Like
Yeah.
He has been the best in 2 weight classes and he was a gold medalist. I mean, who has those? I mean, in combat sports. So I have been just huge on him in turn. I really respect, like, obviously his all-time status. I think he's one of the best ever. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people quite give him credit for, whether it's because they underestimate him due to the cringe. I get it. It is cringe. It's cringe. Don't get me wrong. But I'm able to look past it because when he's in the cage, when he's in the octagon, he's one of the best in the world.
Yeah.
Now, it's been a layoff. And Dominic, as much as I love the guy, when this fight was being discussed on this show a few months ago, I'm pretty sure I said there was no chance that Henry Cejudo would be the next title fight.
And here we are.
So I really underestimated his ability to get this fight. I thought the UFC and Dana White, they seemed to show no interest in really having him come back for a title. I didn't see Henry wanting to come back for anything else. But I'm happy it's happening. And truthfully, I'm kind of surprised Aljamain Sterling is taking this fight because he does seem like a guy, you have some champions and fighters who are so confident in their abilities that they're almost blind to any sort of bad matchups. You know what I'm saying? Like guys that are just so confident when all the fans are kind of going, "Oh, I think that's kind of a bad matchup for him."
Yep.
They just take it on and they believe that they're going to do it. And not that Aljamain Sterling is probably that much different, but he seems like a guy that's more aware
Yeah,
of. It
I
seems
think
like he
so.
can sort of remove himself from the situation and go, "Oh, I have an advantage here, or I am deficient here against this fighter," and has sort of picked his matchups wisely to sort of
Yeah.
maximize his value. Now, the win over Peter Yan, I still value Peter Yan as like one of the top talents in the company. So,
Yeah.
that says a lot. But Dominic, I think this is a bad matchup for Aljamain Sterling. I really do. Yes, he
Mm,
does have a size and reach advantage on Henry Cejudo, but in terms of the wrestling, which is where both these guys will
excel.
tend to go,
Yeah.
Henry Cejudo is the far more accomplished and technical wrestler. And is Aljamain Sterling going to win a fight on his feet? How's he going to do if he's on his back?
Mm,
It's I think his best. There is a world though where I could see him with those long limbs being able to do kind of what he did to Jan, where he's just able to kind of get a hold of his back, wrap him up, um, and kind of hold him down that way. But I
yeah.
really think this is a bad matchup for him. I think Henry Cejudo is fully capable of coming back off the couch after a couple year layoff and winning that bantamweight title. And Dominic, if he wins, I think he's looking at that 145-pound title. I think he's looking at moving
Oof.
up to fight Alexander Volkanovski to become a 3-division UFC champion.
Wow. I'd love to hear or be a fly on the wall for the contract negotiations for this fight with Henry. Because you have to imagine, regardless, they have to make him fight again. He can't come back, win the belt, and then retire
Right.
again. I wouldn't think. But they said that about GSP, and he still did it. So I don't know, maybe. But I actually think so, and that could be, I think, a huge conversation piece come May when we're talking about this fight, recapping the potential outcome of this fight and what's next for Henry, because it's already built in there with him and Volk. They had that thing backstage that I think we even covered on the show where they were talking about potentially fighting one another. So, wow, who would have thought that Henry Cejudo could potentially be the man to be a 3 weight division champion over
That,
other people?
what an unlikely story. I mean, to beat one of the best ever and Demetrius Johnson to get his first in a very close fight and
Mm.
where his
Then
careers
he,
went. So
oh man,
the
I
way he
the,
took out TJ Dillashaw on that first ESPN card and beat Marlon Moraes, who was butchering him with leg kicks early.
are you ready for a big question?
That Oh
This is
no.
so should not.
Oh
It
no.
is February. We should
It's
not be talking
February.
about
Don't do
this.
this. Don't do this.
You want me to hold off? I can
No,
wait.
go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Good. I'm glad you said not to wait because I was probably going to say it anyway. Henry Cejudo, 2-weight champion, defended both belts, comes back, beats Aljamain Sterling, wins that belt, goes up, fights Alexander Volkanovski, wins the 145-pound title. Is he the best fighter of all time? Yes or no? That's all you got to say. That's all you got to say.
I'm gonna say no, but
But it can
it,
change in May.
it clearly secures him as the best combat sports athlete of all time.
Oh, okay. I like how you saved it there. I like that. I like that.
But
No,
I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
say no because I mean Jon Jones, Anderson Silva, GSP, like there is
Can I
something to having a long sustained run in a single weight class.
can I add a
I
what if?
almost value that more
Yeah.
than the different divisions winning a title.
No,
And
I agree. I do
I
actually
do
there.
think Henry's the best of the him and like Amanda are the two that, and even DC defended the heavyweight title. But in terms of like,
The best champs.
yeah, like I think Henry and Amanda and I
Yeah.
guess partly DC have been good examples of that. So
Yeah. It'll be interesting, man. That's a huge fight. I hope, and for what it's worth, I hope that they do make that the main event. They deserve to have a main event, I think, those two guys.
I think it will be because the UFC has stacked so many of these cards the next couple months.
Yeah,
Like,
true.
don't get me wrong, that's a great main event. But typically Aljo's been on like a co-main spot.
Right.
I just think that,
They're like out of title fights. So
yeah,
like,
unless they've still never announced Nunes Aldana, right?
that's true. That hasn't been announced. Yeah,
So
true.
that could be a co-main under them. I mean, I do think this could be a main event for sure.
Yeah, and we'll see where it
Let
happens.
me also just put out there, we were just talking about Jon Jones and Cyril Gane. I think this fight on April 22nd is going to be the winner of that fight's first title defense. Pavlovich versus Blaydes.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I
And
definitely agree with
I'm
that.
not sure people are ready for that, but once Jon Jones, and I think because we haven't got to Jon Jones, Cyril Gane yet, once that fight happens, whoever wins, assuming there's no controversy or some reason to run it back, the winner of Pavlovich Blaydes will be fighting for a title, I believe, and
there's no reason not.
I'm going to be
for that to
happy
happen.
for whoever gets to that spot because
Yeah.
both guys are having their redemption arcs in the UFC. You know, Pavlovich had a long layoff, and now he's been knocking out everybody. And then you got Curtis Blaydes, who seemed like a guy who could not get past the upper echelon of the power punchers of the UFC heavyweight division. Dare I say, Dom, Curtis Blaydes could be the toughest matchup for Jon Jones in the heavyweight division outside of like a Cyril Gane, you know. So.
Yeah, and I think we've even talked about that matchup, I think, before on some sort of episode. That's a huge fight. Very interesting to see how that can play out because if Pavlovich can starch Blaydes like he's been starching everyone else, that's terrifying. But if Blaydes can starch Pavlovich, that's also pretty terrifying. So that's an awesome fight there in main event for April 22nd.
Well said. We will move on to the rest of the MMA weekend. We'll start with Bellator 291. Just a couple more fights. I want to get your thoughts on, Dom. Co-main event, we'll see the number 3 ranked Pedro Carvalho, quite the veteran at this point in the Bellator ranks. He's going up against Jeremy Kennedy, coming off that win over Aaron Pico. But the more you look if you watch the fight, you know Aaron Pico's shoulder just popped up early. It was a tough fight, but a big prove-it fight for Jeremy Kennedy for sure. He is pretty decent favorite for this one. And I'll also throw out Peter Quealy is on this card, as he is one to do on every Irish card. Same with Sinead Kavanaugh and Aaron Clark's on this card. And then, of course, Hassan Magomed Sharipov. So Peter Quealy's taking on Bryce Logan. Anything about these fights that kind of stick out to you on the undercard?
I'm just looking forward to, honestly, number 3 versus number 5, Pedro versus Jeremy, because you're right. Like, Jeremy Kennedy got that win over Pico, but his shoulder was just so gone essentially in that fight. But if you look even past that, wins over Emmanuel Sanchez, he has a loss to Adam Boric, who's a top guy in that division. I think, and this is a guy that has experience in the PFL. I didn't even realize it till looking right now for Jeremy Kennedy. From Canada too, in his prime, 30 years old. I almost wonder if we can see him kind of get a big win. He's minus 250 coming into this fight against Pedro, which I think is interesting, being that, you know, rankings wise, I guess. And Pedro's coming off a win against Mads Burnell. So I think it's actually a really good fight. Don't know if I agree with the line, but there's one way for that line to be proved correctly, and it's Jeremy Kennedy running through Pedro and putting himself in the top 3. That's actually a really good co-main event.
I think very highly of Jeremy Kennedy. Now, I'm not sure if he would have been able to beat Aaron Pico if Pico's shoulder stayed intact, but I looked at that fight probably a little bit closer and just as a higher level fight than most people were maybe giving it the credit of, because I think both guys have the capabilities to compete at the very top of this division. I mean, of course, he's ranked number 4 or 5 or whatever, so he's right there. But I mean, like, I think he can fight for a title. Like, I really believe that. Dominic, I know you said you mentioned he had fought in the PFL. Did you know he had fought in the UFC before?
Oh, you know what? Now that you say it, I am remembering it. That's true.
So he actually started 3-0 in the UFC with the win over Kyle Bochniak, who Zabit actually has a mutual win over. But Dominic, he lost one fight after that and then was gone. And you want to know who his one loss was to in the UFC?
Enlighten me.
Alexander Volkanovski.
Oh,
so this is a guy who was undefeated before going up against one of the best fighters of all time. Well, now he is. But, you know, yes, at the PFL, things were a little more dicey for him. You know, he had some losses by finish to guys like Daniel Pineda. That got overturned. But Daniel Pineda, also a good fighter. His only loss in Bellator has been to Adam Boric, who I still think is very good, even though he lost his title shot opportunity to Patricio Pitbull, but that's nothing to shame. But no, I actually think I like him a lot in this matchup. I think Carvalho might be, I believe he's actually coming in on a win streak, but I think the best of him is kind of behind him. So his spot, I think, is a little inflated in this division just due to what he's achieved already.
Yeah.
But I think he's actually about to start falling down a little bit. So
okay.
It's kind of a great opportunity for Jeremy Kennedy to push himself even closer to those title fight ranks. Peter Queeley's always in for a good fight. Actually, I like watching Sinead Kavanaugh fight
Me
because
too.
she just is a bruiser, man. And I mean, kill
Yeah.
or be killed. And she's going up against Janae Harding, who's 6-7 in her professional MMA career. So
Yeah.
that should be over quick. And then you got those great prospects. Like I'm going to be watching early to see Magomed Sharipov, and then
And just to see Zabit, right, on TV.
Yeah, exactly. Just begging him to come back. So
Yeah.
I think it should be fun. 18 fights. I mean,
That's insane.
It's a little excessive. But,
That's a bit much. Yeah.
But, you know, I'm not going to complain. There's never too much MMA, right?
Yeah, and then the biggest moment of the day, the entire day for MMA on Saturday, will be Peter Queeley's entrance. So if you're going to tune in at all, tune into that part at least, because it's going to be awesome.
Dude.
Yeah.
Just what a song. The rest of UFC Vegas insert number here, we actually got 4 fights that I'll just throw out to you. Co-main, we'll see Andre Muniz take on Brendan Allen, a pretty high-level fight there in that middleweight division. We also will see the return of Tatiana Suarez. She's coming into the women's flyweight division. Dominic, I just crowned Aaron Blanchfield to be a future champion. Yeah. There could be a future where me and you are going to have to go head to head because the women we have championed to be future champions, we may have to go head to head. We may have to put a wager on who's going to become a champion if they were to ever fight, or who would win that fight down the line. But she'll be back going on against Montana De La Rosa, someone me and you actually think a little higher of.
Yeah.
She's on a tough skid right now. So and she is a heavy, heavy underdog, despite the fact Tatiana has not fought in 4 years, 5 years.
Yeah, and hasn't fought in this weight class, but, you know, it doesn't matter, apparently.
Yeah. Also, Canada's own Mike Malott, who I really like, is here going up against Johan Lainesse. That one shouldn't last long.
Fellow Canadian, too.
Oh, I did not realize that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, flyweight division, but it's fought at a catch weight.
Yep.
O'Day Osborne taking on Charles Johnson. I love watching O'Day Osborne fight.
That's a low-key banger.
There was a moment that I really thought he could be something in that division, but then, you know, his last fight, he gets knocked out. It's like, he is a lot of fun to watch, though. So don't blink in that one. So, Dominic, those are 4 fights. What's kind of sticking out to you? Obviously, I know you have quite the lean on one of those fights in Tatiana Suarez.
I'm going to talk about, honestly, though, I'm going to start with the co-main still, because big fan of Brendan Allen, too, I am, from his Contender Series days and what he's done. This is a tough one. This is a tough fight. He was asking for this fight, so mad props to him for that. Andre Muniz himself looks like a future champion, honestly. Like, this guy is he's probably maybe the most underrated, or one of the most underrated ranked fighters in all of the UFC. This guy is an absolute beast.
Look at, like, he's top 10, I think, in his division, and he's fighting Brendan Allen, who's unranked. So
yeah, exactly. And he is, to get my math right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-0 in the UFC, went 2-0 on the Contender Series. Uriah Hall, Jacare Souza, Eric Anders, his last 3 wins. Brendan Allen
submitted Jacare Souza.
Yes, snapped his arm, actually, to make it even worse. If I didn't need to do that, Jacare, I apologize. Don't box, by the way. Anyway, Brendan Allen, last 3 wins. Sam Alvey, Jacob Malkoun, Christoph Jotko, now in the PFL. Didn't even know that signing happened. Wow, I'm rambling here. This is a fun-ass fight. This is a really fun fight, but at the same time, a very big leap for Brendan Allen, I feel like. But maybe, just maybe, he can get it done. He is an underdog going into that. What is the odds? -230, Andre Muniz. Brendan Allen, +185.
It's pretty fair.
Yeah, I like that as a co-main event for those guys. Tatiana Suarez. She's back. Hasn't fought since June 8th, 2019, when she beat Nina Nunes, obviously at 115 pounds. We're talking about someone that, if she hasn't had knee injuries, hasn't had neck injuries, she'd probably be a champion right now. That's how good Tatiana Suarez is. There's people that are listening to this podcast that have never even seen Tatiana Suarez fight.
That's crazy.
Tune in on Saturday night, because it's going to be fun. She's 32 now, though. I'm so sad that literally her perfect prime years have been taken from her. But I hope she's fully 100%, because I think even a 32-year-old Tatiana Suarez is one of the most dangerous women's fighters in the UFC. And I like this as a comeback fight. I think this is damn near perfect. If you're going up to a new weight class, Montana De La Rosa at 125 is a good talent. Me and Noah, as he said, higher on her than others. I like it. I really like this as a spot for a comeback fight. And man, if Montana can get a win here, what an upset and way to, tell people, hey, I'm not just some pushover. If you look at Montana's strength of schedule, it's against really, really solid competition. Macy Barber, Lipsky, Mayra Bueno Silva, Vivian Araujo. I mean, Andrea Lee. She's been fighting really good talent
That's good.
and in her early UFC days. And she's still only 28 years old. But man, Tatiana is a different beast. What if people called her for years the female Habib? I think that says a lot, Noah. What are you expecting? If you can even set expectations, maybe it's not even fair to have expectations, but what are you predicting, I guess, for Tatiana's return here?
I'm glad that's the question you asked me. Now, first, it's funny you mentioned that nobody or people who are listening to this may have never seen her fight. Dominic, there is whole ass families that have created children who are now about to start, who have literally birthed children about to start kindergarten in the time since her last fight.
Yeah.
Like, this is a massive layoff.
Yes.
Massive.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you, I think the odds are a little inflated for that reason.
I do agree with that. I do.
Now, Montana is on a skid, and the way she fought against Macy Barber was not pretty.
Yeah.
And if Macy Barber was able to kind of bully her like that and dominate her like that, what do you think Tatiana Suarez is going to do? I see all of that.
Yeah.
And I see what's most likely going to happen here. But this is a new weight class for Tatiana. After this massive layoff, due to so many injuries piling up, who knows what kind of product we're going to get from her here? What kind of version of herself we're going to get?
Yeah.
It's tough. I mean, I definitely think she's going to win, but I'm preparing myself now to not be as shocked as many if Montana were to pull off this upset.
Well, and from a betting perspective, let's kind of let people in on what's kind of going through your brain. At least I'm imagining that this is what's going through your brain. She's a what is she? Minus 750, all the way up to minus 1,000. I've even seen on some books like minus 900. So when you look at it that way, it's not even really worth parlaying something that large. But if you want to get the odds down to like for her to win by a certain type of finish or just by finish in general, it's almost too worrisome for you to bet that. So you don't even really want to touch it from any angles. Is that kind of at least how you're thinking of it when you're looking at it from a betting perspective? Yeah.
I would have much preferred her to be closer to like a minus 400 or something.
Right.
And, these lines are there for a reason. But it just makes me like there's too many ifs here. There's too many things that we just don't know. I also just want to mention for betting people out there, these Mike Malott, Johan Lanesi, and then Ode Osborne, Charles Johnson. I love those fights to be inside the distance, be under. I'm sure both of these, the over-under is like 1.5, but I wouldn't mind taking the under on both of those if you want to be a little risky. So, Charles Johnson's gone to his fair share of decisions, but Ode Osborne makes up for that. That man never gets out of the first round. So.
Yeah, and Charles Johnson literally just fought a month ago. Like, you got to think he's still probably in pretty solid shape, but it's still short notice against a dangerous guy. We just love flyweights, so it should be a really fun one.
Yeah, agreed. Let's move on to the last segment of the show, the only segment that could really send us out, Dom, and that's with closing statements, the point of the show where we can talk about anything and everything, MMA related or not. So, Dominic, do you have any closing statements for this episode?
I felt like I had something. But we've talked about so much these past 2 hours that almost forgetting.
Do you want me to go? You want me to go first?
You probably should. Yeah, you probably should.
I mean, it's confession time.
Yeah, that's what I thought was going to happen.
I did admit this to Dom off recording because I knew this was going to hurt him a little bit. So, look, I'm just going to come out and say it, guys. Yes, I did it. I watched Knucklemania 3. And I kind of liked it.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, tell them the other part.
Kind of liked it.
Oh.
Didn't like the Diego Sanchez part, but
yeah, boy. Yeah.
But the Greg Hardy fight was fun, and he got knocked out.
Yeah.
The main event was awesome. Let's just say I got 2 TVs in my living room. I'll have one on Prime on one TV. I may pay $7 for the month to watch BKFC 36 on the
Featuring
other TV, headlined by UFC veteran Alan Belcher. So
yeah.
And also Sunday, I will probably be watching Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury.
You know, it's really an interesting thing here that we're like, if you really, and more specifically with the Jake Paul relationship, man, if someone were to go back and clip all of the moments that we've discussed the Paul brothers throughout the show, and really the evolution of our relationship with them has been quite a roller coaster. And now with the bare knuckle thing, I mean, kind of the same can be said. Not much of an evolution, but if you look at what Noah's doing now, it really is just an interesting time here that Noah's going through. This phase in his life is what I kind of labeled it all for.
That's one way to say it. You could also word it like, when you lose like a pet or a family member and you have to go through the stages of grief.
Right.
I think I'm at the last stage with Jake Paul. I'm at the acceptance.
Yeah. And to where we're borderline excited to see what he does.
After he beat Anderson Silva, I was like, well, that's all I said.
Yeah.
I can't say anything now.
He did the shit with the PFL. And we are at a point in our careers and with the podcast that we are intrigued / excited to see the next moves for Jake Paul. That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Love it or hate it.
It's a weird feeling, Dom.
Yeah.
That's one of the things about doing a podcast is you really can't hide from the way you felt.
No, it's really out there. Yeah.
Because I'm sure there were some takes I had in 2018 that I was glad when we started recording in 2020 that I was like, oof, glad that we weren't recording then. Some of those early Jake Paul takes, haven't aged the best.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the beauty.
Yeah. So Dominic, you have anything?
I have quite literally nothing. There's no better way to go out than by you saying what you just said.
Well, my name's Noah Baker. That's Dominic Slee. We are but just 2 of the below average Joes, and we'll see you guys on Monday.